Hello, I'm Heath, and today I'm going to try to get Reign of Cthulhu fully painted in only 3 hours. During this challenge, I'll put the Games Workshop contrast paints to the test. Let's jump in. I've wanted to paint up Reign of Cthulhu for a while now, and I've been meaning to try out the GW contrast paints as well, so I finally decided it was time to paint up the game and try out the paints. I've given myself exactly 3 hours to get the whole game painted from the moment I open up the box to spraying on the clear coat, including doing all the priming. The Cultist Miniatures were going to be the easiest. I wanted them to be classic-looking cultists in black robes, and so I grabbed a can of black paint and primer and sprayed them outside. Once they dry, I'll only need to paint the bases, and then they'll be done. Then I grabbed a can of white primer to prime the character figures and the Shawgoths. As I understood it, the white primer was best for the contrast paints because it would let them stain the white and provide a good color. Painting the bases of the Cultist Miniatures a light gray made them look finished. The bases could have been left black and they still would have looked a lot better than the bright turquoise cultists that they started as, but I find that when the bases are a different color, especially in the case where the miniatures are a solid color like this, it makes the miniatures look more finished. Otherwise, it might just look like they were injected with a black plastic, which arguably would have been a better choice than the turquoise. Hand painting the bases took a good chunk of the 3 hours, but it did finish a lot of the miniatures in the game. By the time I was done with that, the primer on the other miniatures was long since dry, and so I decided that my first experiment with the contrast paints would be on the Shawgoths. I thought that the glaze-like look I was seeing the contrast paints produce would be perfect for the oozy Shawgoths, so I picked out a blue, a purple, and a green to paint the Shawgoths. This way I would have some variety in them. I just slathered on the contrast paints, and this went very well. I was getting the stained color on the high parts of the miniatures, and it was also running down into the recesses rather nicely. There are some things I learned about using the contrast paints as I worked. I need to be a bit neater with them. When I was painting on the color of the character miniatures, I was still very much in the mindset that I used to paint on the base color of the miniatures when I'm painting with a more traditional base color, shade, and then highlight technique. When you're painting on the base color using that technique, you can afford to be a bit sloppy because further base colors will paint over any mistakes in other areas. Plus, there are going to be a lot of other layers going on anyway that you can also use to fix mistakes, so I don't worry too much about being neat with the base color coat. But the contrast paints don't cover the other contrast paints as well because they're not opaque. I should have thought of that before. So when you're painting, if you get paint on an area that you don't want it can't be as easily painted over with the correct color. The colors tend to blend together and produce a muddier, murkier look when the colors overlap. But that's a good lesson learned. Only painting one color of the miniatures takes much less time than painting the base coat, the shade, and then a highlight anyway, so taking a little more time on the single pass with the contrast paints shouldn't be such a big deal. I'll take more care the next time. Apparently I don't have the video of my painting the player characters, but it went a lot like painting the Shawgoths. I made one pass with traditional Army Painter miniature paints to take care of some details I thought needed to be more solid colors. This wasn't a lot, but it was things like the tongues on the Shawgoths, their teeth, and a couple of items like shirts and ties on the miniatures. Regarding the contrast paints, the bottom line is that I like them and I'm going to continue using them. I, like many of you, have hundreds and maybe thousands of miniatures around the house, and it sure would be nice to have them painted, but it would also be nice to be able to paint them and still have time to do other things with my life. I was watching some other speed painting videos here on YouTube, and I was seeing that some people are able to paint miniatures a lot faster than this. Some people were painting whole armies in this amount of time. Knowing that, and also now having run this test with the contrast paints, I want to try to get even more done. I think the best strategy is to divide my miniatures into at least 2 different categories depending on how great I really need the miniatures to look. One category is speed paint or tabletop standard, and the other will be much nicer, and I'll call that the pro paint standard, even though I don't think I'm a pro level painter. Not by any means. I think most of my miniatures fit into the speed paint or tabletop standard category. It would only be the heroes of my favorite game or the PCs of RPGs that would get more detailed treatment. That's when I'll really take the time to push my painting and try to increase my skill level. This game was a great test for the contrast paints, because this is a game I really enjoy and would like to be able to play painted, but not one that I care to spend the time to try to do a pro-level paint job on every miniature in the box. And if you've been following a lot of the other projects on this channel, then you know I like easy, and you also know that I like getting things to the tabletop. So, maybe using contrast paints and other speed painting techniques, I can get a lot more done. We'll see. I hit my challenge mark with these miniatures easily. I think the whole project was about 2 hours and 45 minutes. I like how these came out. Check out the trench coat and the red cape especially. It looks like they came out just the way the contrast paints are supposed to work. We've got the nice color on the high areas and deep shading in the fabric recesses. One problem that we do have is that I do see that gravity is causing some of the contrast paints to pool near the bottom. When I apply a shade to miniatures using the more traditional technique, I always put them on their side. That way the shade pools in the recesses and doesn't just all slide down to the feet. I think next time I'm using contrast paints, I will also make sure to keep the characters on their front or on their back while the paints are drying, and we may get a better look with the contrast paints in the recesses of the miniature. Also, somewhere in this time, I had one of the hands of the miniatures break off. I don't know what happened there, but oh well. If you've enjoyed this video, please check out the playlists on my YouTube channel. I have a whole playlist devoted to upgrading board games. In each video, I take a different board game and make upgraded components for it, like our Jumbo 3D Hero Quest board we made. There are also a lot of other videos on the channel about tabletop RPGs, fantasy, storytelling, and more. I look forward to seeing you in many more videos to come.